At the inheritance meeting, my daughter threw the papers in my face and accused me of killing her father for money. I walked away without defending myself. 3 days later, the police arrived and uncovered a truth about our family that shattered everything she believed. My daughter threw the inheritance papers across the table so hard that several pages slid onto the floor. Then she looked straight at her mother and said something no parent should ever have to hear from their own child. "You're a leech. You probably killed Dad for the money." The entire conference room went silent. No one moved. The attorney stopped speaking. Gerald's brother lowered his eyes. Even the assistant taking notes seemed frozen in place. But Agatha Wilson did not shout back. She did not defend herself. She did not tell her daughter she was cruel, ungrateful, or wrong. She simply picked up her purse, stood, straightened her blouse, and walked out of the room. And that is the detail I cannot stop thinking about. Because when someone is falsely accused of something as horrifying as killing their own husband, we expect anger. We expect panic. We expect immediate denial. Agatha gave them none of that. She gave them silence. And sometimes silence is exactly what makes people more suspicious. Welcome to When Family Breaks One. I'm drawn to stories like this because family betrayals are rarely as simple as they first appear. The person everyone blames may be carrying truths no one else has ever been allowed to see. And the person who seems most certain may be standing on a version of the past that was carefully built for them. If stories about hidden family truths, betrayal, accountability, and healing mean something to you, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that make us look beneath the surface instead of accepting the easiest explanation. Now stay with me, because the accusation in that conference room was only the beginning. 3 days later, Agatha was alone in the house where she had lived with Gerald for 38 years. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. There is a difference. Gerald's coat was still hanging where he had left it. His reading glasses were beside his chair. His favorite grandfather clock continued ticking in the hallway, measuring time in a house that had somehow felt empty long before Gerald died. Agatha had spent 3 days ignoring phone calls. Neighbors who normally waved suddenly seemed busy. She could feel the accusation spreading, even though no one said anything directly. That is another thing family scandals do. They travel quietly. One person tells another that something doesn't feel right. Someone else says they always suspected there were problems. By the time the truth has a chance to catch up, suspicion has already built a home for itself. At 8:15 that morning, someone knocked on Agatha's front door. She opened it and found 2 police officers standing on the porch. The woman introduced herself as Detective Lisa Morales. The man beside her was Detective Rivera. "Mrs. Agatha Wilson?" Agatha tightened the belt of her robe. "Yes, we need to ask you some questions about allegations made by your daughter." Agatha stepped aside. "Would you like some coffee?" That small question clearly surprised them. I understand why. We like to imagine innocent people behave one way and guilty people behave another. But real human beings do not follow neat scripts. Some people scream when frightened. Some cry. Some become strangely polite. Some offer coffee, because routine is the only thing keeping them from falling apart. The detectives followed Agatha into the living room. On the mantel were photographs of the Wilson family across the years. Nola missing her 2 front teeth. Gerald standing proudly beside her at graduation. Christmas pictures, birthdays, vacations, a complete family history in frames. At least one version of it. Detective Morales opened her notebook. "Your daughter believes there may have been irregularities surrounding your husband's death." Agatha looked at her. "Irregularities? She says you managed his medication. I did." She also says you had become resentful toward him. Agatha did not answer immediately. Instead, she asked, "Did Nola tell you her father had stage 4 pancreatic cancer?" Morales nodded. They already had the medical information. Gerald had been given only a few months to live. He lasted 5. During those final months, Agatha was the person changing his bedding when he became too weak to care for himself. She organized his medications. She prepared food he could swallow. She drove him to appointments. She spoke with hospice staff. She sat beside him when pain made sleep difficult. And she did all of that while Gerald continued criticizing her. He complained that she gave him medication too slowly, then too quickly. He told Nola that her mother was impatient, that Agatha seemed angry. that she wanted her life back. And perhaps, somewhere inside herself, part of Agatha did want her life back. That does not make her a murderer. It makes her human. I think this matters because we often demand emotional purity from people who have lived through difficult relationships. We expect them to suffer without resentment, care without exhaustion, forgive without anger. But a person can resent what someone has done to them and still choose not to harm them. Two things can be true at the same time. Detective Rivera leaned forward. "Mrs. Wilson, did you hate your husband?" Agatha stared at one of the photographs. "No." Then she paused. "That would have been easier." Morales watched her carefully. "What does that mean?" Agatha looked toward Nola's childhood picture. "My daughter loved her father. We understand that." "No, I don't think you do." Her voice had changed. It was still calm, but something underneath it had begun to surface. Nola believed her father was kind, protective, generous. She thought he was the safest person in our family. Was he? Agatha swallowed. For her, I made sure he was. That sentence changes everything. Not, he was a good man. Not, he never did anything wrong. For her, I made sure he was. Detective Morales lowered her pen. "Emsers. Wilson, are you saying your husband abused you?" Agatha's eyes moved toward the floor. For decades, she had avoided that word. Abuse. People think naming something makes it easier. Sometimes naming it makes it more frightening because once the word exists, every excuse that came before it begins to collapse. Finally, Agatha nodded. Yes. Physically? Sometimes. Emotionally? Yes. Financially? Agatha gave a tired smile. Gerald controlled everything. Morales waited. Bank accounts? Yes. Your spending? Yes. Did you have independent access to money? Not really. Not for years. The investigation had just changed direction. But Detective Morales still asked the question almost everyone asks eventually. Why didn't you leave? Agatha looked at her. I did, Morales frowned. When? Nola was 7. What happened? Agatha's hand tightened around the edge of her chair. I took her and went to my sister's house in Oregon. And? 3 days later, Gerald arrived with the police. The room became silent again. He told them I was unstable. He told them I had taken his daughter. He had people willing to speak for him. Our pastor, neighbors, people from work. Did they believe him? Agatha gave a small laugh with no humor in it. Everyone believed Gerald. That sentence may be the most important thing to understand about what happened next. Gerald did not need to isolate Agatha physically every moment. He had something more powerful. He had credibility. People saw the polished husband, the respected father, the generous man. Agatha had spent years covering bruises, explaining injuries, protecting her daughter, and helping maintain the very image that later trapped her. When she returned home with Nola, Gerald made it clear there would not be another attempt. He told Agatha that if she ever tried to leave again, he would fight to take Nola permanently. She believed him, so she stayed. Not because staying was easy, not because what Gerald did was acceptable. She stayed because fear had convinced her that leaving might cost her the one person she was trying hardest to protect. Detective Morales sat quietly for several seconds. And Nola never knew? Agatha shook her head. No! Why? Because she adored him. Morales looked at the photographs. And you wanted to preserve that? Agatha's eyes filled, but she did not cry. I wanted my daughter to have a father she could love. That choice would eventually cost Agatha more than she imagined. Because while she was hiding Gerald's worst behavior from Nola, Gerald was shaping Nola's understanding of her mother. Dad was generous. Mom worried about money. Dad was fun. Mom said no. Dad understood. Mom complained. And over enough years, those small differences became a story. Gerald was the hero. Agatha was the difficult one. Then, shortly before Gerald died, he did something that made that story even more dangerous. Detective Morales reached into her folder. Your daughter showed us a note. Agatha looked up. What note? It was found in your husband's Bible. Morales placed a photograph on the table. Gerald's handwriting was unmistakable. The message was short. If something happened to him, Nola was supposed to look closely at Agatha. Agatha stared at the photograph. Her face slowly changed. Not guilt. Recognition. Gerald had known he was dying. He knew what the doctors had said. He knew cancer was taking him. So why leave behind a warning that pointed directly at his wife? Why prepare his daughter to suspect the woman caring for him? Was Gerald frightened of Agatha, or had a man who spent decades controlling his family found a way to control the story even after his death? Detective Morales stood to leave. If there's anything else we need to know about your marriage, now would be the time. Agatha looked toward the staircase, then higher, toward the attic. For years, Gerald had controlled what people saw, but Agatha had kept something he never found: a box. Hospital records, photographs, financial papers, a coded notebook, and one letter addressed to Nola that Agatha had written 15 years earlier on a night when she feared she might not survive until morning. She looked back at the detective. There is something. What? Agatha's voice dropped almost to a whisper. 38 years of proof. And that is where the story truly begins. Because upstairs, hidden beneath Christmas decorations, old school projects, and ordinary family memories, was another version of the Wilson marriage. The version Nola had never seen. The version Gerald never wanted anyone to believe. And once that box was opened, the daughter who called her mother a leech would be forced to question nearly everything she thought she knew about her father. The box Agatha had hidden for 38 years was about to do what she had never been able to do herself: speak without apologizing. Detective Morales returned the next morning, and Agatha was already waiting in the living room with the box on the coffee table. She had brought it down from the attic before sunrise. Dust still clung to the cardboard. The lid looked ordinary, almost disappointing, as if something so small should not be able to contain an entire marriage. Agatha sat across from it for nearly an hour before she opened it. Inside were medical records, dated photographs, bank statements, a narrow notebook, and a sealed envelope addressed to Nola. Morales did not reach for anything immediately. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Agatha looked at the box. "No," she said. "But I think I have to." The first file contained hospital discharge papers from more than 3 decades earlier, a fractured wrist. The explanation recorded at the time was a fall. Another report described cracked ribs after what Agatha had called an accident on the stairs. There were stitches, bruising, a shoulder injury, and photographs that had never been shown to anyone. What struck me was not simply that she had kept them. It was how carefully she had kept them. Dates written on the backs of photographs, receipts tucked behind hospital records, small details matched to entries in the notebook. It was not the work of someone building a dramatic story for the future. It felt more like the work of a person trying to preserve reality before someone else convinced her it had never happened. Morales picked up the notebook. "What is this?" "My record." "Of what?" Agatha hesitated. "Of him." The pages were full of codes. G1, G2, kitchen, car, stairs. Nola home, Nola away. Sorry afterward. Flowers. Morales looked up. "You wrote in code?" Gerald read things that did not belong to him. That answer told me more about their marriage than any long explanation could. A person should not need a secret language to describe what happens inside their own home. Agatha began at the beginning. She was 22 when she met Gerald at the downtown library where she worked. He was 10 years older, polished and self-assured, the kind of man who seemed to know exactly where he was going. He asked for a book on investment strategy, then came back 2 days later even though he had not finished it. The second time, he asked Agatha to dinner. When he proposed after 6 months, everyone told her she was lucky. And Agatha believed she was. This is one reason I resist the easy question. How could she not see what he was? Because people rarely introduce themselves as the person who will eventually control you. Gerald did not begin with threats. He began with opinions. He did not like one of Agatha's friends, then another. He thought a certain dress was too revealing. He wondered why she needed to work after marriage. He said he was better with money, so it made sense for him to manage the accounts. None of those things, taken alone, seemed large enough to justify fear. That is how control often gains ground, not through one dramatic demand, but through a series of small permissions. The first time Gerald struck her came only months after the wedding. Agatha had dropped a glass in the kitchen. Gerald's anger arrived so quickly that she barely understood what had happened. Then came the apology, tears, flowers, promises. He told her he was under pressure. He told her he hated himself for losing control. He told her it would never happen again. Agatha believed him because she was still comparing him to the man who had courted her. For a while, things improved. Then the pattern returned. By the time she understood that the apology was part of the cycle, leaving no longer felt simple. Then she became pregnant. Nola changed everything. Gerald was thrilled to have a daughter. He could be warm with her in ways Agatha rarely experienced anymore. He held Nola for hours when she was an infant. He bought toys. He took photographs. He told everyone she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And this is where the story becomes emotionally complicated. Gerald's love for Nola did not erase what he did to Agatha. Agatha's fear of Gerald did not erase the fact that Nola experienced him as loving. Two different realities existed under the same roof. That matters because children do not automatically know the entire truth about their parents. They know the version they are allowed to see. As Nola grew older, Gerald became the parent associated with pleasure. He bought the surprises. He relaxed the rules. He said yes after Agatha had said no. Agatha became the parent who worried about bedtime, schoolwork, spending, manners, and consequences. Gerald would sometimes smile and say, "You know how your mother is." A small sentence, almost harmless. But repeated often enough, it gave Nola a role to assign to each parent. Dad understood her. Mom made things difficult. Gerald did not need to directly tell Nola to dislike her mother. He only had to make sure Nola interpreted every conflict through the same frame. Meanwhile, Agatha was making a different calculation. If Gerald was angry, she tried to redirect him. If she sensed his mood changing, she found a reason to send Nola upstairs. A bath, homework, a phone call, anything that created distance. Over time, Agatha became skilled at reading the atmosphere of her own home. The way Gerald set down his keys, how hard he closed a cabinet, the length of silence before he answered a question. Nola saw very little of the worst moments. She saw the aftermath, a wrist in a brace, a bruise covered with makeup, her mother moving carefully after what she called another fall. Agatha thought she was protecting her daughter, but every cover story also protected Gerald's image. That consequence would not become clear until much later. When Nola was 7, Agatha tried to leave. She had been putting aside small amounts of cash whenever she could, nothing that would attract attention. She packed only what they could carry. She waited until Gerald was at work. To Nola, it was an adventure. To Agatha, it was an escape. They traveled to Oregon and stayed with Agatha's sister. For 3 days, Agatha experienced a version of life that felt almost impossible. No listening for Gerald's car, no checking his mood, no calculating which words were safe. She slept badly, but for a different reason. She was waiting for him to find them. He did. Gerald arrived with police and the posture of a worried father. He said Agatha was unstable. He said she had taken their daughter without permission. He had a respected reputation, people who trusted him, and a calm explanation ready for anyone who asked. Agatha had something else, and fear does not always present well. She was exhausted, defensive, terrified that one wrong sentence would be used against her. Her sister had children and little money. Gerald made it clear that any custody fight would be long and ugly. Agatha returned home. I want to be careful here, because stories like this can become unfair when they imply there was one obvious decision and the victim simply failed to make it. Agatha did make a decision, but she made it inside a world where she believed Gerald had more money, more credibility, more social support, and a real ability to separate her from Nola. After they returned, Gerald told her there would not be a second attempt. If she tried to leave again, he would fight for custody. He would tell people she was unstable. He would make sure she lost her daughter. Agatha believed him, so she stayed. And from that point forward, protecting Nola became less about escaping Gerald and more about managing him. That strategy worked in one sense. Nola did not grow up fearing her father, but it failed in another. She grew up trusting him more than she trusted her mother. That is the tragedy I find hardest to shake. Agatha took the damage because she wanted Nola to keep her innocence. But innocence protected through silence can become vulnerability to someone else's story. Years passed. The coded notebook grew thicker. The photographs accumulated. Hospital papers were folded into the box. Bank statements began appearing too, documenting another form of control. Gerald had gradually limited Agatha's access to money until household purchases required explanation. She learned to keep receipts because he expected them. The evidence was never organized for revenge. At first, Agatha thought she might need it if she tried to leave again. Later, it became something more private, proof that she was not imagining her own life. Morales asked her directly, "Why didn't you ever show Nola?" Agatha looked at the sealed envelope. "Because I wanted her to have a father she could love." "And what did that cost you?" Agatha did not answer. She did not need to. Nola had thrown the answer in her face 3 days earlier. Morales reached for the envelope. "This is for her?" Agatha nodded. "When did you write it?" 15 years ago. "Why?" Agatha's eyes lowered. "There was a night I thought I might not make it to morning." Morales slowly set the envelope down. Agatha had written everything then. Not because she planned to confront Gerald, but because she wanted Nola to know the truth if silence was no longer possible. Morning came. Gerald calmed down. Life resumed. Agatha hid the letter. And that detail says something painful about survival. Sometimes a crisis ends without the danger truly ending. The family eats breakfast. Someone goes to work. Someone goes to school. The house looks normal again, and the truth gets put back into a box. Then Morales opened her own folder. "We found something that changes the investigation." Agatha looked up. Morales placed a photograph on the table, Gerald's handwriting, a message left in his Bible. If something happened to him, Nola was supposed to look closely at Agatha. Agatha stared at the words for a long time. Then her expression changed. Not surprise, recognition. He was preparing her, she said. Morales did not argue. For what? To believe him after he was gone. That possibility was still only a possibility. The detectives needed evidence. But Gerald had known he was dying. He knew his illness was advanced. He knew Agatha had spent decades keeping quiet. And now, in his final months, he had left behind a message that pointed directly at the one person who knew the version of him no one else had seen. Morales closed the folder. "There's more." Agatha's eyes lifted. "We're reviewing Gerald's financial records." "Why?" "There are transactions that don't make sense." Agatha gave a small, bitter laugh. "His finances rarely made sense to me. He never let them." Morales watched her. "How long has it been since you had full access to the accounts?" Agatha thought about it. 20 years, maybe more. That answer opened the next door. Because if Agatha had spent decades being portrayed as the woman who wanted Gerald's money, investigators now had to ask a very different question. Who had actually been controlling it? And as they followed that question, Gerald's handwritten warning began to look less like one frightened man's final concern and more like one piece of a much larger plan. And once the investigators began following the money, the question was no longer whether Gerald had kept secrets, but how carefully he had arranged them before he died. Detective Morales returned to Agatha's house, carrying a folder thicker than the one she had brought the day before. Agatha knew immediately that something had changed. There was a certain expression people wear when they are no longer looking at isolated facts but at a pattern. Morales sat at the kitchen table and did not open the folder right away. "We found a second bank account." Agatha stared at her. "In Gerald's name?" "Yes." "How much was in it?" Morales hesitated. "Enough that we need to understand where the money came from." The answer should have shocked Agatha. Instead, she looked tired. Gerald had spent years questioning grocery receipts, household expenses, utility bills, and purchases that cost less than a dinner out. Agatha had learned to explain everything she spent because Gerald insisted that responsible families required discipline. Yet while he was demanding accountability from her, he had been moving money out of accounts she believed belonged to both of them. Regular transfers, repeated over years, quiet enough not to attract attention, large enough to matter. And I think this is where financial control becomes easy to misunderstand from the outside. It is not always about leaving someone completely penniless. Sometimes it is about making one person feel as though every dollar requires permission, while the other person remains free to move thousands without explanation. Agatha had lived inside that imbalance for so long that she had stopped thinking of the money as hers at all. Morales showed her several statements. "Do you recognize these transfers?" "No." "Did Gerald ever mention this account?" "No." "Did you have access to your joint savings?" "On paper, yes." Agatha paused. In reality, not in any meaningful way. That distinction mattered. Then Morales opened another section of the folder. There's something else. Agatha looked at her. Your husband changed his will 2 weeks before he died. For the first time, Agatha seemed genuinely surprised. He already had a will. He did. This was a revision. Morales explained that the changes were carefully worded. Gerald had not written that Agatha was dangerous. He had not accused her directly of harming him. Instead, he had inserted language suggesting concern about the way she had treated him during his illness. It was subtle. Just enough to raise questions later. Just enough to make anyone reading it wonder whether something had happened behind closed doors. Agatha sat back. He was laying groundwork. Morales did not answer immediately, but she did not disagree. That phrase stayed with me, laying groundwork. Because manipulation often survives by avoiding statements that can be easily disproved. Gerald did not need to write, Agatha is abusive. He only needed to leave behind enough uncertainty for someone else to complete the accusation, and Nola had. The will also placed the house and most of the estate under Nola's control. At first glance, that could look like an ordinary father leaving property to his daughter. But combined with the other evidence, it created a painful possibility. Gerald may have understood that if Nola distrusted Agatha, then Agatha's future security would depend on a daughter already prepared to believe the worst about her. Even after death, Gerald had positioned himself between them. But what happened next disturbed Agatha even more. Morales pulled several printed emails from the folder. Do you remember a man named James Harrington? Agatha froze. She had not heard the name spoken aloud in decades. Yes, who was he? A friend from college. Morales waited. Agatha gave a faint smile. He wanted to be more than a friend. Were you close? Once. James had known Agatha before Gerald, before the years of careful speech, before she learned to monitor rooms, before silence became a survival habit. Morales pushed the emails toward her. Gerald contacted him 3 months before he died. Agatha looked up sharply. Why? He wanted information about you. Agatha began reading. Gerald's first messages were polite, almost clinical. He introduced himself as Agatha's husband. He explained that his health was declining. Then he began asking questions. Had Agatha always been emotionally volatile? Had James ever seen her lose control? Had she shown signs of instability when she was younger? Had she experienced unexplained outbursts? Agatha stopped reading. He was trying to build a history. Morales nodded slightly. That's what we're trying to determine. The next email was James's response. He remembered Agatha as kind, gentle, thoughtful. Nothing in his memories matched Gerald's description. Then came the line that made Agatha cover her mouth with one hand. James suggested that if Agatha had changed so dramatically, perhaps the more important question was not what was wrong with her, but what had happened to her over the years. After decades of being told she was difficult, emotional, unreasonable, and impossible to please, a man who had not seen her since youth had somehow recognized something people much closer to her had missed. Agatha cried quietly, not because she wanted James back, not because she imagined another life with him. She cried because someone still remembered who she had been before Gerald spent 38 years redefining her. Morales let her have the moment. Then she said, James wasn't the only person Gerald contacted. There were others, former friends, acquaintances, people from earlier chapters of Agatha's life. Gerald had reached backward, searching for someone who might support the version of her he wanted to leave behind. Most did not. Some barely remembered her. Others described her as quiet and kind. But the purpose was becoming difficult to ignore. Gerald appeared to have anticipated that Agatha might finally speak after his death. And if she did, he wanted her credibility damaged before she ever opened her mouth. I find that part of the story particularly unsettling because it shows how reputation can become a weapon. If one person spends years telling everyone that another person is unstable, bitter, jealous, or dramatic, eventually even truthful behavior gets interpreted through that label. Agatha did not need to be disproven. She only needed to be doubted. Nola had already learned to doubt her. That was enough. Meanwhile, the detectives still had another responsibility. No matter what Gerald had done during the marriage, they could not simply dismiss Nola's accusation because Agatha had been mistreated. Gerald's death had to be examined on its own evidence. That distinction matters to me. Justice cannot depend on who seems more sympathetic. It has to depend on facts. So investigators reviewed Gerald's hospice records, medication schedules, prescription changes, nursing notes, timing, dosage. They spoke with the staff who had visited the house. They spoke with Dr. Patel, the physician who had treated Gerald during his final months. Agatha waited while strangers examined some of the most private days of her life. Every pill she had given, every recorded symptom, every decline, every moment when Gerald became weaker. There was something almost cruel about having to prove that she had properly cared for a man who had spent years hurting her. But she understood why it had to be done. Nola had made an accusation. The accusation had to be tested, not mocked, not dismissed, tested. That is an important difference. A few days later, Morales returned again. This time, she brought news. The medication records matched the prescriptions. The hospice notes revealed no suspicious pattern. The nurses had not identified unexplained irregularities. Dr. Patel confirmed that Gerald's decline was consistent with advanced pancreatic cancer. There was no medical evidence that Agatha had caused his death, no indication that she had manipulated his medication, no evidence of foul play. Agatha closed her eyes. She did not celebrate. That reaction fascinated me. After being accused of killing her husband, she had finally been told the evidence supported her innocence. Yet relief was not the first emotion on her face. It was grief, because being cleared meant the next question had to be answered. Why had Nola believed the accusation so easily? And Agatha already knew the answer. Gerald had spent years preparing her to. Morales asked permission to take the box from the attic into evidence. Agatha placed both hands on the cardboard lid. For 38 years, those records had belonged only to her. They had been the witnesses she trusted when she trusted almost no one else. Giving them away felt strangely like surrendering part of herself. Will I get them back? Yes. Will everything be documented? Yes, Agatha nodded. Then take it. Morales carefully packed the photographs, medical papers, coded notebook, financial statements, and the unopened letter to Nola. Then she stopped. There's one more thing. Agatha looked at her. We've asked Nola to come to the station tomorrow. Agatha's expression changed immediately. Why? She needs to see what we found. No. Morales seemed surprised. No? She doesn't need to see all of this. Sirs. Wilson, she accused you of causing her father's death. I know. Then she needs to understand why the evidence does not support that. Agatha looked toward the family photographs. You don't understand. What? Agatha's voice became quieter. If you show her everything, she loses him. Morales frowned. Gerald is already gone. Agatha shook her head. Not the father she remembers. That was the loss Agatha had feared for decades. She had spent most of Nola's life protecting that father. Now the truth would take him away in a single afternoon. Morales spoke gently. You protected her from what happened in your marriage. Agatha said nothing, but protecting her from the truth now may only continue what Gerald started. The words hurt because Agatha knew they were right. That night, she sat alone in Gerald's old leather chair. The house was silent except for the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. The sound had followed her through most of her adult life. Dinner times, appointments, arguments, long nights waiting for Gerald's mood to change. Agatha stood and walked toward it. She opened the glass door. Then she stopped the pendulum with her hand. For the first time in years, the hallway became completely quiet. The next day, Nola would sit across from her mother again. But there would be no inheritance papers between them. There would be medical records, photographs, bank statements, emails, and a conclusion from the doctors that left no room for the accusation Gerald had helped plant. Agatha was no longer afraid the police would think she killed her husband. She was afraid of something much more personal. She was afraid that when Nola finally learned who Gerald had been, her daughter would realize that almost every certainty she carried about her family had been built on a story someone else had written for her. The evidence had already dismantled Gerald's version of the truth on paper. Now it had to survive the harder test of being placed in front of the daughter who had believed him all her life. Agatha knew Nola was already at the police station before she reached the interview room. Detective Morales met her in the hallway and gave her one last chance to wait somewhere else. Agatha almost took it. Then she thought about the inheritance meeting, about the papers hitting the table, about the word leech, and about the look in Nola's eyes when she accused her of killing Gerald. "No," Agatha said. "If she has to hear it, she should hear it with me there." When the door opened, Nola turned. Her expression changed immediately. "What is she doing here?" Detective Rivera asked her to sit down. "I'm not talking to her." "You don't have to," Morales said. "But you do need to hear what we found." Nola stayed standing for another second, rigid with anger, then lowered herself back into the chair. Agatha sat across from her. I can only imagine how impossible that distance must have felt. A few feet of table separated them, but between mother and daughter were decades of misunderstandings. One dead husband, one accusation of murder, and a version of family history neither woman could carry in the same way anymore. Morales began carefully. "We investigated your allegations concerning your father's death." Nola folded her arms. "And? We found no evidence that your mother caused his death." Nola's face tightened. "That's not what Dad believed." Rivera slid a medical summary toward her. "Your father's hospice records, medication logs, nursing notes, and physician's assessment are consistent. His decline matched the natural progression of advanced pancreatic cancer. There were no unexplained medication irregularities." Nola did not touch the paper. "My father told me she was angry about caring for him." Agatha spoke before the detectives could answer. "I was angry sometimes." Nola looked at her. It was not the answer she expected. Agatha continued. "I was tired. I was hurt. I resented many things about our marriage. And I still gave him the medication he was prescribed. I still cared for him. That moment matters to me because Agatha did not try to purchase innocence by pretending she had never felt resentment. She allowed herself to be human. People can be angry, exhausted, and deeply hurt while still choosing to act responsibly." Morales placed another folder on the table. "This investigation uncovered information about your parents' marriage that you did not know." Nola's eyes shifted toward Agatha. "What kind of information?" Rivera opened the folder. The first photograph changed the room. Agatha with bruising around one eye. Another showed marks on her arm. Another was connected to a hospital record involving fractured ribs. Nola stared. "No one spoke." She picked up one photograph. "I remember this." Agatha knew which one she meant. "You said you fell." "I did say that." Nola looked at another. "And this one?" "I told you I walked into something." "You lied to me." The sentence came out sharp. Agatha did not defend herself. "Yes." Nola looked almost offended by the admission. "Why?" "Because you were a child. That doesn't explain 30 years. "No," Agatha said. "It doesn't. Protection and secrecy are not identical, even when they grow from the same fear." Agatha had protected Nola from seeing Gerald's worst behavior, but the same silence had left Nola without information she needed to understand her own family. Morales moved to the financial records. "These documents show your father controlled nearly all access to the family finances and maintained accounts your mother did not know about." Nola stared at the statements. "But Dad said she cared about money more than anything." Agatha let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I had to save receipts for groceries." Nola looked at her. Morales continued. "We also found that your father contacted people who knew your mother before their marriage. He asked questions suggesting she had a history of instability or irrational behavior." Nola's face changed again. "Why would he do that?" Rivera answered cautiously. "We cannot know every motive, but the pattern suggests he was trying to create a record that would damage your mother's credibility." Then they showed her the emails. James Harrington's refusal to support Gerald's description. Other old acquaintances who remembered Agatha differently. The revised will containing language that cast doubt on her conduct during Gerald's illness. The handwritten warning in the Bible. Pieces that had looked separate now formed a single picture. Nola pushed the papers away. "I don't believe this." Then she looked at the photographs again. Her certainty was already weakening. "My father loved me." Agatha's voice softened. "I know. He was good to me. I know. He protected me." Agatha swallowed. "Yes." Nola looked up. "How can all of those things be true if this is true too?" That may be the hardest question in the entire story. Learning that someone harmed another person does not erase every good memory you have of them. Nola was being forced to understand that the man she loved had also been capable of cruelty she never saw. Agatha said, "You knew the father he chose to be with you. I knew the husband he was with me." Nola stared at her mother. The sentence seemed to reach something deeper than the evidence. For years, Nola had believed there was one truth about Gerald. Now she was learning that people can occupy radically different roles inside the same family. Then came the blow. Morales told her that the complaint against Agatha was being closed. There was no medical evidence of foul play. The documentation instead supported a history of long-term domestic abuse and financial control. Nola lowered her head. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then memory began doing what evidence had started. "My graduation," she whispered. Agatha said nothing. "You were moving strangely that day." Agatha closed her eyes. "Yes, you told me you pulled a muscle." "Yes." Nola's voice started to break. "That wasn't true either, was it?" "No." Nola covered her mouth. Gerald had bought her an expensive bracelet for graduation. She remembered showing it to everyone. She remembered being irritated when Agatha questioned the cost. At the time, Nola thought her mother was jealous and controlling. Now Agatha told her what she had never known. Gerald had injured her the day before the ceremony. Agatha had gone anyway. She had stood for photographs. She had smiled. She had watched Gerald present the bracelet and become, in everyone's eyes, the generous father. Nola began crying. "I thought you were the problem." Agatha's eyes filled too. "I know. I thought you made him angry. I know. I thought he had to protect me from you." Agatha looked directly at her daughter. "That was part of why I never told you." Nola suddenly became angry again. "At me? At losing you?" The room went still. Agatha explained that when Nola was 7, she had tried to leave Gerald and had become convinced he could take her daughter away permanently. Nola remembered fragments. A bus trip. Her aunt's house. Being told it was an adventure. She had never known what it meant. "So you stayed because of me?" Agatha shook her head. "I stayed because I was afraid. You were part of what I was afraid of losing. That isn't the same as saying any of this was your fault." I'm glad she made that distinction. Children should not be made responsible for the decisions adults make under fear. Nola had been used inside the family dynamic, but she had not created it. Then Nola asked the question Agatha had dreaded. "Why didn't you tell me when I got older?" Agatha had no perfect answer. "Because by then you loved him so completely. And every year I waited made telling you harder. You let me hate you." Agatha looked down. Yes. No excuse. No request for sympathy. Just recognition of the cost. Nola began to shake. "I accused you of murder. Yes. I threw those papers at you. Yes. I called you a leech. Yes. Why aren't you yelling at me?" Agatha's answer was quiet. "Because I don't want us to spend another 30 years hurting each other just because we finally know who hurt us first." That line, for me, is where the story stops being about revenge. Agatha could have used the moment to punish Nola emotionally. She had every reason to be furious. Instead, she chose accountability without cruelty. Nola wiped her face. "How can you forgive me?" "I don't know if forgiveness is what we need first. Then what do we need?" Agatha reached across the table. "Truth, time, and maybe the chance to learn who we are without your father interpreting us to each other." Nola looked at her mother's hand for a long moment. Then she took it. The detectives eventually left them alone. They sat in silence. But it was no longer the same silence Agatha had lived with for years. This silence did not hide anything. It gave the truth room to settle. When they finally left the station, Nola asked if she could come home with her mother. The drive was quiet. Inside the house, she stopped beneath Gerald's grandfather clock. The pendulum was still. "You stopped it?" "Yes. Why?" Agatha looked at the silent clock. "I think I was tired of hearing his time in every room." Nola walked through the house slowly, studying photographs she had seen hundreds of times. For the first time, she no longer trusted the smiles to tell her the whole story. "I need to know everything," she said. Agatha looked at her daughter. "Everything will hurt. I know. And some of it may make you angry with me too. I know." Agatha sat in Gerald's old chair. Nola took the couch opposite her. Then, without police files or legal papers between them, Agatha began telling her daughter about the marriage from the beginning. Not to destroy Gerald, not to rewrite every good memory, but to finally give Nola something she had never been allowed to have, the whole truth. And as evening settled over the house, the two women understood that learning the truth was only the first step. Living with it would be much harder. Learning the truth did not repair Agatha and Nola overnight. It simply gave them, for the first time in decades, an honest place from which to begin. The next morning, Nola returned to the house with a suitcase. She stood in the doorway looking almost embarrassed. "I don't know how long I should stay." Agatha stepped aside. "Then don't decide today." That became the rhythm of their healing. They stopped trying to solve 38 years all at once. There were no dramatic speeches every morning, no instant forgiveness, no magical moment when everything that had happened suddenly became easier to carry. Instead, they began with ordinary things. Coffee before Nola left for work, dinner at the kitchen table, short conversations that occasionally became longer ones. Some evenings they spoke about Gerald. Other evenings they deliberately did not. And I think that mattered. When a family has spent years revolving around one controlling person, even after that person is gone, they can remain at the center of every conversation. Agatha and Nola needed to learn that rebuilding their relationship did not mean spending the rest of their lives discussing Gerald. They also needed new memories that belonged only to them. Nola moved into her old bedroom. Gerald had painted it beige after she left for college because he said the original color was childish. Nola stood in the doorway one afternoon and said, "This room feels like a waiting room." Agatha laughed. It was one of the first times Nola had heard her laugh without tension behind it. They painted the walls a soft sage green. As they worked, Agatha told stories Nola had forgotten. Her first bicycle, the stuffed bear she carried everywhere. The afternoon she tried to wash all her toys in the bathtub. These were not revelations about abuse. They were simply a mother returning pieces of childhood to a daughter who had spent months questioning every memory she had. Slowly, the house itself began changing. Gerald's heavy furniture was replaced piece by piece. Curtains were opened. Rooms became brighter. His old study had remained almost untouched after his death. Nola eventually asked, "Do you want to keep it like this?" Agatha looked around. No, so they transformed it. Nola used one side for architectural drawings from work. Agatha placed a desk near the window. For years, she had quietly imagined writing about her life. Gerald used to dismiss the idea. Who would want to read that? Now Nola looked at the empty pages on her mother's desk and said, "I would." That small sentence meant more than any apology could have, because Nola was no longer asking Agatha to defend her past. She was asking to hear her voice. 6 months after the inheritance meeting, another envelope arrived from the attorney. Nola brought it home unopened. "I wanted us to look at it together." They sat at the dining table. The documents confirmed that the house would now legally belong to both of them. Gerald had left control of the property to Nola, along with instructions designed to keep Agatha from benefiting from much of what he left behind. Nola had chosen not to preserve that division. She had worked with an attorney to place Agatha back on the property title. Agatha stared at the paperwork. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." "Then why?" Nola took a moment before answering. "Because for years I believed you wanted to take something from this family." Her voice softened. "Now I understand how much this family took from you." Agatha looked down. She did not want Nola's guilt to become another form of control. "You don't owe me your life because you were wrong about me." "I know." Nola reached into the envelope. "This isn't guilt." She pulled out another document. A power of attorney. Agatha frowned. "What is this?" "I want you to be the person who can make decisions for me if I ever can't make them myself." "Nola, you don't have to prove that you trust me." "I'm not proving it." She placed the document between them. "I'm choosing it." That distinction stayed with me. Trust cannot be restored by demanding that someone believe you again. It comes back through choices. Small ones, consistent ones, sometimes costly ones. Then Nola reached into her bag and placed a small jewelry box in front of her mother. Agatha opened it. Inside was a silver locket. Her hands stopped. Gerald had once given her one almost identical to it early in their marriage. Years later, during one of his rages, he had torn it from her neck and broken the chain. Agatha had never replaced it. Nola said. "Open it." Inside was a tiny photograph of Nola as a child. Beside it were 2 words: "Truth heals." Agatha's eyes filled. "I'm not sure truth always heals," Nola nodded. "Maybe not by itself." That answer felt more honest. Truth can wound before it heals. It can dismantle identities, destroy illusions, force people to grieve relationships they thought they understood. But healing built on a lie has nowhere stable to stand. Truth gave Agatha and Nola a foundation. What they built on it was their responsibility. Later, Nola told her she wanted to use part of the inheritance to create something Gerald never would have approved of. A foundation supporting women and children affected by domestic violence. Legal resources, housing assistance, counseling, professional support for people who felt trapped, isolated, or financially controlled. They called it the Silent Voices Foundation. Agatha loved the name. For most of her life, silence had been complicated. Sometimes silence protected her. Sometimes it protected Nola. Sometimes it protected Gerald. And eventually, silence almost destroyed the relationship between mother and daughter. Now they wanted to help people understand that asking for help was not weakness, and that safety often requires information, planning, reliable support, and people who are willing to listen without immediately asking, "Why didn't you just leave?" One evening, Agatha and Nola sat together on the back porch. The garden was full of flowers. Gerald had always disliked them along the fence because he thought they looked messy. Agatha planted them anyway. Nola looked toward her mother. "I found the letters." Agatha's expression changed. "What letters?" "The ones you wrote to me when I was in college. Those had been lonely years." Nola had been distant then, firmly convinced that Gerald was the reasonable parent and Agatha was the source of tension. Agatha wrote letters she never mailed. Nola continued. "You never blamed me." Agatha looked away. "You were my daughter. You never even told me how badly I was hurting you." Agatha was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I spent so long trying to protect you from my pain that eventually I didn't know how to share any of it with you." Nola reached for her hand. "I see you now, Mom." Agatha looked at her. "Really? Not through Dad?" Nola's voice shook. "Just you." The silver locket caught the evening light. And that is the part of this story I keep returning to. The truth did not give Agatha back 38 years. It did not erase Nola's accusation. It did not turn Gerald's actions into something forgivable. It did not make mother and daughter innocent of every mistake they made along the way. But it ended Gerald's control over their understanding of each other. And sometimes that is where healing starts. Not with forgetting, not with pretending the damage never happened, but with refusing to let the person who caused the damage continue defining what everyone else believes. So I want to ask you something. If you discovered that the parent you blamed for years had actually been protecting you from a truth you never understood, could you rebuild that relationship? And if you were Agatha, after your own daughter publicly accused you of killing her father, how much forgiveness would you be willing to offer? Would you forgive immediately? Would you need time? Would you set boundaries first? Tell me what you would do. Because when families break, sometimes the hardest truth is not discovering who caused the damage. It is deciding what kind of person you want to become after the truth finally comes out. Kate. When I look back at Agatha and Nola's story, I do not think the deepest lesson is simply that the truth eventually came out. The deeper lesson is that silence, even when it begins as protection, can sometimes grow into something that separates the very people we are trying to protect. Agatha spent decades believing that shielding Nola from Gerald's behavior was the safest choice she could make. She carried the fear, the humiliation, the financial control, and the loneliness by herself because she wanted her daughter to have a father she could love. But over time, that silence left space for Gerald to shape the story. Nola grew up believing her mother was difficult, resentful, and eventually even dangerous. Only when evidence forced the hidden truth into the open did she finally understand what her mother had endured. What I find most meaningful is that Agatha did not use the truth as a weapon. She could have tried to humiliate Nola in return. She could have demanded instant forgiveness, emotional repayment, or lifelong guilt. Instead, she chose something harder: boundaries, honesty, time, and the possibility of rebuilding. That is where I think this story becomes useful in real life. If you are living inside a difficult family situation, Do not assume that carrying everything alone is always the strongest choice. Protect your safety first, but when possible, document important facts, maintain access to trusted people, protect your financial independence, and seek qualified professional support. If someone repeatedly makes you question your memory, your judgment, or your right to speak, do not ignore that pattern. And if you are the person learning a painful truth about your family, try not to rush into either denial or instant judgment. Ask questions. Listen carefully. Separate evidence from assumptions. Understand that two people can have very different experiences of the same family. Perhaps the most important lesson is this: forgiveness does not require forgetting. Love does not require tolerating harm. And reconciliation is not something anyone is automatically owed. Agatha and Nola began healing only when they stopped protecting an old family image and started building a relationship based on what was actually true. Nola eventually chose to turn part of the inheritance into support for others affected by domestic violence, transforming something connected to control into something intended to help people regain choices and dignity. So here is my question for you. If you were Agatha, would you give Nola another chance after everything that happened? Please share your answer in the comments so everyone can read and learn from different points of view. And if this story gave you something to think about, please subscribe to When Family Breaks One. Your support helps us keep creating more meaningful stories about family, truth, betrayal, boundaries, and healing.